nuclear energy is a controversial topic in Sweden. However, it seems as if there is a changing mindset, and the government is certainly softening their stance towards the nuclear energy resource. But what will it look like? Will we see SMRs or large builds? To unpack the topic, I had the opportunity to speak to John Ahlberg from Kärnfull Next. He explains what we can look forward to in terms of the Swedish nuclear landscape and why Sweden could indeed be the silver bullet of the nuclear sector in Europe. I'm Pamela Largue, and this is the Energy Transitions Podcast. John, thank you for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure to talk about a subject that is obviously quite controversial still here in Sweden, and that's, of course, nuclear power. Why is nuclear energy so controversial?
I mean, there's so many reasons why nuclear power is controversial. I don't think it is as controversial anymore, though. But there's a big mind change, I think, over the past years. We started this company 6 years ago. And I mean, we've been through pandemics, invasions, Nord Stream explosions, the lot, right? It's just reality hit pretty hard. And when you are able to produce a vast amount of dispatchable, clean, firm power, from a small plot of land, and that is exactly what the world wants or needs, then people talk about it and they have opinions about it. Before people, knew nuclear was around, they had probably some pop cultural, references to it. Now people are starting to learn why it's needed, and then, people just talk about it around kitchen tables. It's good, though, because we need to talk about how to electrify the future.
Indeed. And yesterday the government made quite a significant announcement about funding for nuclear. Tell us a little bit about that and what you see the implications of this being.
Well, I mean, this turnaround of how to build new nuclear in Sweden, and I guess Europe as a total, has been going on for a while, and the government now is it's pretty broad political consensus around the ambitions of reaching 300 terawatt hours of electricity by 2045 in Sweden. That's more than doubling. So we needed to find ways to do that. The government now has been moving very quickly to ensure that nuclear power has a chance to play its role. Yesterday they pushed through the financing mechanism, which basically means that we have state loans and contracts for difference to fund new nuclear, and it's going to be a big part of getting the nuclear build out on track. And I think Sweden has an appetite to become the silver bullet in European Union of how to build new nuclear. I think this is one part of it. I think we've had tremendous legislational changes over these 3 years they've been in office as well, really enabling new nuclear. Environmental laws that have been updated, regulatory frameworks that have been completely revamped to enable new business models like the ones we're working with. So it's just another step towards the road of building out new nuclear. So
before we delve into the new business models and perhaps some of the new technologies, I love that you make that bold statement. You say Sweden as the silver bullet of nuclear. France could be listening.
I'm sure they are. No, and I think when we look at what happens on the European Union level, it's interesting to see the nuclear alliance that's been formulated. I think it was an inception by the Swedish energy minister Ebba Busch, but it was during the time when Sweden was holding the hammer in the European Union. So it was initiated, and now I think they have like 15 countries. And that's a lot of countries in the European Union. That's a majority of countries that are part of the nuclear alliance. And when you start to work together as a union and try to find ways to establish new nuclear power, you look to what are the good examples. And I think it seems that Sweden is hell-bent on proving what that model could look like when you move away from the traditional old way of building nuclear into a more modern way of doing it. So it's not them saying that, but it's me seeing what they're doing and kind of how that is positioned. I spend a lot of time in South Korea and with American suppliers, and I think they share that vision that Sweden is really putting the flag of how to create an ecosystem of level terms and building out nuclear on, the way it should be built out. You have to remember we live in a world of 31 countries announcing as a climate pledge to triple nuclear energy, that's going to take a lot of work and a lot of new business models and ways of doing it. And I think if Sweden can be a part of proving how to do that, then I think they're doing the right things to do that.
Let's be honest, John. Nuclear energy is not well known for being cost effective and running on time. These are big projects. But how do you see the future of nuclear looking? Are we looking at large builds? Do you think we're looking at more advanced reactors, SMRs? What are your thoughts?
I mean, it goes back to that pledge. Tripling nuclear energy is going to need all kinds of energy, nuclear energy. I mean, large builds will be carried out like we have seen, hopefully more efficient and more on time, more on budget, as we've seen in the EU or in the US. I think the model that we saw in the UAE with the Barakah project from the South Korean side was impressive, on time, on budget, a lot of great clean energy added to a new country, a fledgling new nuclear country. So I think there are good, examples and less good ones. Large will be a big part of it, but there will be a lot of SMRs as well, small modular reactors, and that's where companies like mine have a bigger role to play. I believe for the big blocks, it's going to be state utilities. It's going to be those kind of companies that will be taking on those projects. It's usually, tens of thousands of people working at sites, to build on the site, whereas small modular reactors are, more factory built and then quicker assembly on ground. But of course, they're smaller, and if they're established, then once you have a 1 gigawatt site or a 300 megawatt site, the economies of scale talk in favor of the bigger ones, but the road getting there and how to de-risk the project and how to start an early rolling of capital into it, then SMRs have a real role to play as well. And now especially, I think for us, the whole tailwind of the hyperscalers looking at AI. I mean, just go back 2 years or so, we didn't even understand that there might be this incredible need of AI GPU capacity as well in the electricity field. So SMRs are perfect for that, because then you can do more of the redundancy situations. If you build out a data center for an AI company, then you can build it out and make sure that you have 99.9999999 redundancy, thanks to SMRs being built next to each other. So it's just different strokes for different bulks, I suppose. but it's you will see both. We have to, otherwise we won't be able to reach those targets and these pledges that have been made. So.
Indeed, and you touched on data centers, and that is really a big issue. How do we ensure the baseload power for these huge centers, and of course AI and computing power that's needed? Sweden doesn't have too many options. I mean, Sweden's got nuclear and hydro. And it's not to say that renewable power can't contribute to this, but surely nuclear is going to have to play a role.
Yeah, I think so. And it's also a decision kind of. I mean, I notice this a lot when I travel outside of Sweden. I mean, we're a very Sweden-centric company. We use Sweden as a sandbox for project development of SMRs, basically. And here we're focused on helping the national grid in southern Sweden, where we are today. That's our hyper focus. But of course, when we go to, I was just in Netherlands speaking at one of these big conferences, the offtake situation and the PPA situation, especially around data centers, that's the key subject. And that's because there is no governmental push to add electrons to the grid as we have in Sweden. So it's kind of two different situations currently, where we will build a first fleet of SMRs that will help Sweden as a nation. And then next to those, we'll build another 4 units that are potentially co-located with data centers. And then we'll have better economies and better chances to provide the hyperscalers with the PPAs they want. So it kind of works in parallel to each other. But I mean, their energy needs are crazy vast. I mean, we're talking hundreds of gigawatts needed just to deal with AI in the EU, and that was never forecasted before. So I think we need to build electricity of all kinds that are fossil free at such scale. If we do that, then we will live in a much nicer world where we can really take full advantage of the developments that are coming from AI, in healthcare and this is going to be game changing, but we need to provide it with clean power. And if we don't do it with nuclear or a grid where you have nuclear, hydro, and it's stable and cost efficient, then these guys will probably go down the road of fossil fuels to fuel their AI data centers. And so it's really about balancing the dream of everything that AI can achieve with making sure it's done in a sustainable way. And I think that's where nuclear really comes in, especially SMRs. I mean, if you're building a 600 megawatt data center for one of these hyperscalers, and you place it next to an SMR campus like we do, where you have maybe 3 times 300 megawatts, we can ensure the redundancy to really feed that data center at all times, throughout the GIS, etc. So it's really about the size of SMRs make a lot of sense in this context. And to us, I think it's also important to remember SMRs come in all different flavors as well. Very small, quite large, but also in terms of cooling methods. We work with stuff that's commercially ready. So light water reactors, Gen 3 plus, the best of the proven technologies out there. And that's really what can come in and be a big part of helping transition, helping grow. It's crazy when you think of it. Electricity consumption is going up, even though we try to do a lot of flexibility and efficiencies, and we should continue doing that. And remember, Sweden, we've been trying to be efficient with our households for many years and been very successful in doing so. But as that happens, we need to also prepare ourselves that there will be the whole energy cake is, quite fossil still. So we need to do deep decarbonization of transport and industry. And here comes AI on top. Where that will end up in terms of terawatt hours, I don't know. I just know that it's probably a good time to get building stuff that could help this. And
absolutely.
That's what we're trying to do.
And you touched on the decarbonization of industry and transport. And I mean, surely when it comes to industrial decarbonization, SMRs have a role to play there.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that was actually the beginning of when we started looking at that, because the price is so volatile for electricity in Sweden. It's pretty low, from a starting point of view. So getting the investment case together is more. I mean, if you're replacing coal with ETS in Poland, then you have a bigger, place to navigate in terms of your pricing for your nuclear plants. We knew that Sweden would be great for nuclear to really go into the hard to abate sectors. But we needed to be clever about what would that road look like in terms of decarbonizing steel or decarbonizing, and that goes by means of splitting atoms, creating hydrogen basically, and then especially for us, we have some agreements with ferry operators, for example, that want synthetic fuels. That whole journey, when you look at making cost-efficient hydrogen. And then that's going to be difficult with the state of electrolyzers and the size of electrolyzers and the lifetime of electrolyzers. Splitting the atom or building the SMR is the least of the problems in that technical chain. And mind you, if you need to make synthetic fuels for a big ferry, you also need carbohydrates to take that hydrogen and refine it. There's a lot of things to that puzzle that is really, really difficult. So I think it's good to just learn SMRs, electrons, and provide those into the grid and into data centers, and really become really good at that, so we can make a better use case once the electrolyzer world is more capable of providing us with solid oxide electrolyzers that is of a size and cost and lifetime that is making that use case of creating hydrogen at a cost-efficient level possible. So we have to play this game of chess a bit differently than we thought back when we started. We thought, electrolyzers, that sounds great. Let's do hydrogen. Turns out they weren't as ready as we were hoping, and maybe the SMRs were more ready than we were thinking. So it's it comes around, but I think it's we live in a world where security of supply and kind of ensuring that you have the ability to have fuel available for multiple years on ground. These stuff are all talking in favor of nuclear energy as a starting point of decarbonizing society. And also, I think here, and I mean, my company is often doing that. We're usually sharing the stage with the power project developers because we see that we have a chance to help each other out. There's no way that I'm going to be able to build nuclear enough to get the 300 terawatt hours just from atoms. There needs to be some kind of balance between it. And in Sweden, you mentioned hydropower. We have hydropower, which is fantastic. It's far up in the north, though, and we can't really scale it more than maybe a gigawatt or so. So if you're going to increase the electricity production, you need to scale the things that actually can scale. And that means nuclear probably at 50% of our mix back in 2050. And then a lot of wind, a lot of flexibility, a lot of storage, a lot of everything, and hydro, remaining, hopefully, because that's also under scrutiny by the EU if we can have our hydropower plants. So either way I look at it, from AI or from steel manufacturers or from synthetic fuels, comes back to getting this right. Starting to get good sites that can provide dispatchable clean power. That's a key starting point that makes sense, I think.
Indeed. Tell us, John, about Kärnfull. For the listeners who don't know about what it is that you do and how you fit into the bigger picture. And perhaps you can touch on some of the projects that you're involved in, because there's a lot of exciting stuff going on.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. And Kärnfull has been around now for 6 years. And it feels like longer, though, when you see a photo of me when I founded the company compared to now. But that's because we've been very, very busy. Busy bees. We started Kärnfull. It's a group, so we have multiple disciplines. We have an electricity supplier business that is active in Sweden and in Denmark. I think playing a big part in helping Denmark become more, aware of nuclear power. And why we started it, we're not engineers, neither me nor my co-founder. We're finance guys and public affairs guys and communicators. But we realized that nuclear power, has been misunderstood. So how can we help people understand it more? And there are, plenty of studies that show that the more a person knows about nuclear energy, the more they like it. And that's kind of interesting when you think about it. The more I understand how it works, the better I like it. So we had to start working with that. And Kärnfull became a vehicle, a way for households. So Kärnfull Energy became a way for people to choose nuclear power for their households and for their companies as an electricity supplier. And of course, that created a buzz, which helped us to create the network to also start working with tech providers, keeping an eye on how can we build new nuclear and learn from what really worked in the renewable sector, project developers. So it was in the connection of SMRs becoming available. We see, for example, our dear partners, GE Hitachi, they're moving forward with they have a final investment decision in Canada now, putting the first one on grid in Canada by 2030. That technology is actually Sweden originated, that boil water reactor that they're building. So we were keen to get that onto our belt as well back in 2021. And as we understood that we could potentially start crafting a business model that was mimicking what had worked in the renewables industry, i.e. early stage project developers, finding the new greenfield sites, working with the municipalities, the local communities, getting the permits, starting to work with pushing this project from completely unfeasible up until ready to build. That's our job, the early mile experts, if you like, to take it from first sketch up until, permitted and ready to build. And will it work in the nuclear industry? We don't know yet, but I have no other, there's no other way that I can see that we will be able to triple nuclear energy, and especially with SMRs being available now, well, then these things become more of boardroom decisions to invest in than for state heads to shake hands, right? So it kind of makes sense. I still think to this date, and the proof is in the pudding, right? We can say now firmly that Kärnfull Energy is a success in terms of getting, tens and thousands of people to choose nuclear energy to power their lives. Will Kärnfull Next, the project development company, be as successful? We won't know until maybe, 4 years from now. But we are running projects. We're probably, and this again comes back to where Sweden's at. more than maybe us. I think we're doing good because we have brought in expertise from Finland and South Korea, and we're very methodical about how we move projects forward. But Sweden, tailwind, financing mechanism, new regulatory framework. We also have a final waste deposit decision here in Sweden that helps from an EU taxonomy point of view when it comes to ESG capital, etc. So there's a lot of stuff that makes Sweden really, really on the forefront of trying this business model. So we have been busy working, I think, with 20-some municipalities now over the past 3 years. And we have singled out a couple of places where we've moved from conceptual study to pre-feasibility study to feasibility study, when things start to really heat up and money start to occur. And we've done that in Valdermorsvik. That's one of our big sites now, a nice big site that looks, as far as we know now, perfect to host a big SMR campus, as we call them. We also do prospecting in southern Sweden, so where we are now, Karlshamn, we have Västervik, we have Motala, we have been to Nyköping. So there's a bunch of candidate sites. And what we've done then is we realized, okay, you need to provide investors with a program rather than a project, because you want to take down the binary risk of something happening to project X, an environmental issue stops it or something. So by taking a programmatic approach, using the same consortium of builders, we have partners like Samsung Construction, and we have Hitachi, I mentioned, KHMP, Hyundai Engineering. There's a lot of people that are in the Kärnfull network helping us push these projects forward. And I think by taking the same consortium and the same technology and same blueprints and making sure they work at multiple sites, we're able to push a program forward, which gives us, space to bring in investors that are not looking for binary risks, but looking for, hedging the risks at early project development phases. And then, of course, what we foresee is that the final asset owners of these sites are going to be the infra funds, the pension funds. We already talked to those guys. They're completely uninterested in the risk that we have now, but they're very appealed by the risks associated with a ready-to-build project that is in construction, and that will give them 60 years of annuity flows, So it's our job to get us there with our financiers, partners, etc., to get us to the point where construction begins, basically. And of course, operations is a big part of this as well. People keep asking, so who's going to operate the plants? Well, I don't rule out that Kärnfull won't have an operational entity down the road. But there are so many capable operators, utilities in the Nordic region, that if they look at the business model of not having to own the asset on their balance sheet, but instead as a service provide operations, especially if you use the same technology at multiple sites, maybe around Europe, all the Hitachi sites or all the whatever sites, then that's going to be a super interesting business model for the likes of Fortum, who we've been partnered with for many years as well. I mean, there's so many people that are, very capable of maintaining a plant and taking responsibility over decades. So we're giving the industry that push and nudge, but we're ensuring that we create, a structure where there's very reliable, very trusted partners involved early, and then move the project up until the shovel's in the ground, if you like.
So Kärnfull actually has quite an important role to play in this nuclear puzzle. But I do have one final question for you, John, and that is, you mentioned how potentially you'd perhaps aged, or you'd hinted that you look a little different in photographs. What is it that keeps you so excited and enthused about the work that you do in the sector that you work in?
It's a good question, because you need to have high energy when you do this. And I am a high energy guy from the start. But I think, we started, I had 16 years in fintech before this, right? Working for a big corporation, and I enjoyed it. But it wasn't my life ambition. I wanted to do something that really matters. And I saw electrification as a calling, if you like, and helping out for clean electrification gives me that kind of push every day. And the team now, I mean, it's not like it's us alone anymore. There's, I think there may be 15 people in the Kärnfull group and consultants and stuff. So, that gives me energy to work with these guys. And the shared vision of, because it's quite easy what we try to do in terms of, okay, that's what we need to do. It's about the excellence of execution that's going to be the trick here. There's not a secret IP sauce of doing this. It's just about, doing this better than at anyone else and finding the greenfield sites and securing them. That's what we do. We secure sites. And it just gives me energy to be part of this. And right now, nuclear's in demand, and it's in vogue, but it doesn't have to be all the time. I think we should kind of pan out more, and nuclear is in the spotlight right now, and once project starts to get going, there's going to be other stuff that's going to also make a lot of sense to talk about. So it's just fun to be part of that electrification journey, I think.
Well, John, it has been an absolute pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you for sharing that vision with us.
Of course, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you to our listeners. For more insights, join the Enlit community.